Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So last night we talked about some ways that we avoid evangelism, and I spent some time talking about ignorance and explaining what that looks like and how there really is an innocence related to ignorance. It's not something that we should look down on people for, but it's something we should work on. But then I also listed that there were two other categories related to why we avoid evangelism. That would be indifference and fear, and that we would talk about those today. And so I want to tell a story about a friend to open up. And my friend, before he became Orthodox Christian, attended a parish where he felt like there was a pressure to keep a list of those that he had what they called saved. And that this list kind of showed how much of a Christian he was. And so, and then they would talk about this list, and that there was a big emphasis on growing your list. And how many people have you helped convert? And that's all that really mattered, was the list. And he said, when he became Orthodox, he started a new list. And that list was the list of people that he had made feel loved instead. And that finally he began to understand evangelism the way the ancient church and the ancient Christians meant it to be. That it's not about this list of, look what I've accomplished. It's this list of, look how many people I've let God's love flow through me as a conduit to those around me. And so I think that's what we need to keep in mind, that difference. So today, this afternoon, fear and indifference. And we're going to start with a little bit of participation. There's a famous quote by St. Seraphim of Sarov: "Acquire the Holy Spirit, and thousands around you will be saved." And it's a very common quote related to Orthodox evangelism. So my question for you, if you guys will participate, I hope you will, how do we fill ourselves with the Holy Spirit? That really is the question from that quote. How do we do that? Well, the church has given us a number of ways that are a bit obvious. We have the sacraments, we have prayer, we have fasting, participating in all of the services, right? But there's another aspect that we're missing that we need to focus on, and that is the sense of community. And so what I think St. Seraphim was saying, and I've never been able to talk to him about this line, but I'd love to. Someday. Is that we acquire the Holy Spirit through people. That if we kind of make ourselves a hermit, and I don't know if you know this, but hermits in the Orthodox Church are very rare. Monastics live in a community. And it's very rare that someone would be blessed to be made into a hermit and live completely alone from mankind. It's very rare. There's actually a story related to this where there was this monk in a monastery who was really irritated with all of his brothers. And he was like, I'm very serious about this. They're not taking it seriously. And I think it's time for me to go off and be on my own, where I can, in a cave and focus. And he goes off on his own and leaves the monastery out just a little ways into the wilderness away from the cave. And that night he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees this huge beam of light going up from the monastery to heaven. And over his little cave, there's sparks coming up. And when he wakes up, he realizes God was telling him that he was meant to be in that community. That he was not better than his brethren. He was meant to be with them. And even though people are difficult for us sometimes, there's another way to look at that. That difficulty, by design, get you where you're wanting to go. Without the difficulty, you will not get there. Another person told me it this way, in the sense of, it's kind of like most of the people that hurt me in my life are church-related. Why is that? Well, I also realized that most of the people I hurt are church-related. So it's both ways. It's because God wants us to sharpen each other. And it's a little painful. And think of us, each of us, as like jagged rocks that have been thrown together in a bag. And God is jostling that bag. But the more he jostles the bag, and the more we rub against each other, and it strikes one jagged rock against the other, it hurts. But over time, those jagged rocks become smooth and beautiful and are formed by each other with the hands of God involved. That really is evangelism in the sense of what we're dealing with today. And I hope it will help you understand there is fear of getting hurt. We're in a society that seems to do everything they can to avoid pain and suffering. But suffering is a bad thing. Pain is a bad thing. And there is pain and suffering in evangelism. There's pain and suffering in getting it wrong. There's pain and suffering in being wrong when someone knows more than you do. There's pain and suffering in someone getting upset with you. So there's a lot of pain and suffering. But there's one pain and suffering that we should be focusing on. And I talked about this a little bit last night. And that's sharing in their pain and suffering. And so my friend I talked about earlier, when he went from keeping a list of people that he had saved to a list that he had loved, what changed was this was a list that he was sharing in their suffering. That's how he loved them. That's how you create that list. You have to share in their pain. So a couple of practical things, if you will, about overcoming fear when we're dealing with this fear of evangelism. For introverts, I like to talk about introverts and extroverts, and I'll give a basic definition before we move along. But I just think it's so fascinating to watch how our society works with introverts and extroverts. For example, a lot of the school systems I've seen, I'm not talking about specific teachers, but our school systems cater to extroverts. So if you're an introvert, you tend to think in your head before you respond. You take a few moments to gather your thoughts. Well, the extroverts, we raise our hand before we even know what the answer is when we're called on by a teacher. And we just blurt out whatever's there. So we get really high participation, but really low on actually getting right. Whereas your introverts are more likely maybe to get it right, but they're slower at raising their hand. There's one thing that I've been talking about for years now, and I can't not mention it this weekend, even though I've talked to you guys about it before, but it's one of those things that we need that regular reminder of. You know, in the Orthodox Church, we hear the same Gospels over and over and over, which means we need those reminders, right? And one of those reminders is that we're not asking enough questions. And that questions will calm the fear. I try not to speak about my wife too much without her knowing that I'm talking about her, but she knows that I talk about her as the introvert, me as the extrovert, okay? And I think my wife is brilliant. She's very smart. But she gets a little fearful about talking about topics that she feels like when she's talking to someone who might be smarter than her. We all know what that feels like. And she will even admit this method of asking more questions, how it changes the scenario. And she was even curious, why did God ask so many questions, either in the Old Testament, in the form of Jesus Christ, his ministry here? Why are there so many questions involved? And I don't think we realize how loving it is to ask more questions. Every time I get engaged with a conversation with someone where I feel like we're not on the same page, I know my number one responsibility is to ask more questions and to pay attention about what's actually being said. Because it's really easy to ask questions and just wait for them to finish. And that's not what we're called to do. When God asks you a question, He's not waiting for you to finish answering. He knows what your answer is and He listens to it. And then He responds. So from there we move on to indifference. This is another friend of mine. Her name's Michelle. And Michelle and I were spending some time together talking through what she did and what I did. And we were trying to help each other out. And I cared about the work she did because I cared about her. And she cared about the work that I do because she cares about me. But she eventually had an epiphany that really helped me out. She said, I finally understand what your struggle is in the work that you do. She said, I don't care about it in general. She said, I only care because I care about you. But no one's ever taught me to care. I know about it, but it's low on my priority list. I've got so many different other things going on in my life that I have to deal with. Evangelism is a low priority. And when I began to understand that she saw it as one more check mark at the end of the day. Okay, did I evangelize someone? Check. Right? It's a compartmentalized piece of her life. And so we talked through this framework of how she had looked at evangelism. And that's when I began to understand that we have a different number of people who are indifferent. They know this is expected. It doesn't seem to be a big deal in the Orthodox Church, even though it was preached this morning during Matins, during Orthros. But it's over and over and over. The Protestants call this, and I love this term, so I use it, the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is to go forth, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them what I have taught you. There's 3 components. And we've dropped the first one. And sometimes we drop the third one, and we just baptize. But you have to make disciples first. Making disciples, baptize them, and then there's a continuation after the baptism. It's not over. And that's where we're dealing with both ignorance and indifference. So as we were talking through this problem of why she was indifferent to evangelism, why she said she was too busy. She had too much going on. She had to take care of various family activities and shuttle buses and already had previous commitments. And she didn't realize how it was supposed to be a natural part of her life. It's almost, I started to talk to her about it in a way of like prayer. I said, if I started telling you that you need to pray more and you say, that's not high on my priority list, I think we would all get our ears peaked and go, we know prayer should be a natural routine, right? And that you can pray when you're standing in line, you can pray when you're driving, you could pray when you're laying in bed about to fall asleep and have prayer being the last thing that you do, and that you can incorporate it into your life so it's not a compartmentalized thing. And so she did not see how evangelism was the way she talked to the grocery store clerk who was having a bad day. She didn't see how evangelism is being nice to the old lady that comes in and tells her to get out of her seat on Sunday mornings. She didn't see how evangelism is her children and the responsibility she has with them. She compartmentalized it as, I don't have time for that. And so I think that's where the indifference came from. And as we've worked through this, she has admitted that she's now seeing it in a different way, that she now understands the statement that we opened with last night, that orthodoxy is evangelism, that you can't get away from it. She didn't understand my definition at first, and I'll review that definition for those who don't remember. It has 3 statements. Statement number 1, God wants a perfect relationship with you, and He wants me to help. Statement number 2, God wants a perfect relationship with me, and He wants you to help. Statement number 3 is that 1 and 2 apply all the time with every human encounter and even when you're alone. We don't have time to go back into why we chose perfect. But it is a relationship, but it's not a personal relationship that we're told about often these days. I'm not negating the personal relationship. What I'm saying is it's part of a perfect relationship. That God has demonstrated through the Holy Trinity to us what a perfect relationship looks like, and that he wants us to participate in that perfect relationship. So what I'm curious about is, can I help you shift reality for a moment and realize that what you think is real isn't real? So I'm going to need audience participation from Kenny. Do we have a penny?
What's that?
I need a penny.
I think I have one.
You can come on up.
You need to do his makeup today.
So we're going to play around with reality.
We have the penny back when you're done.
Yeah.
This is how much it costs to get in. Okay, come on up here. Okay. If you've seen this skit, have you seen this? You know this? You don't know this one? Okay, so what we're going to try to do is, hold on. You want to fix your collar?
Yeah. Post.
Okay. All right, hold on. Okay, so I'm going to hold this here. Okay. And you got okay, and I'm going to push your head into the penny because we're going to try to get it to stay on his forehead. Okay? So while I'm pushing there, so what's going to happen is I'm going to hold it here for a little bit until it really stays, and then he has to hit the back of his head until it falls off. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Have you done this before?
No.
You never done this before?
No.
It's almost there.
Uh-huh.
I'm pushing pretty hard, right?
Yes.
Do you want help? I can push harder with you.
Yeah.
Is he going to have the...
Okay.
Mark up the beast after this.
Hold on. Close your eyes.
With my eyes?
Yeah, close your eyes. Okay. Now smack the back of your head until it comes off. Come on.
I hadn't done that before, but
Okay.
it didn't feel real.
It didn't feel real. Okay. That's okay. Go ahead and sit down.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for ruining the illustration.
Thanks for ruining my illustration. Here's your penny. Okay. So it doesn't work every
I
time.
can still feel a little bit, though.
You still feel it.
Yeah.
So did it feel like it was there?
Until you told me to close my eyes.
And that messed
And
you
then,
up.
like imagine. It was like,
I didn't tell you to imagine. So what happens is, when I took the penny away, he still felt it. And even though he knew something was up, because he knows me a little too well, his sense of reality got a little off. Is the penny there? Is it not there? Right? And you knew the penny wasn't there. This is kind of like how God looks at us. He sees us smack in the back of our heads all the time. And he's saying, just connect with reality. And it won't be that bad. I promise. Reality is very important. And we have ways that we can connect with reality. And one of the most important ones is humility. Humility is really not about debasing yourself, just in general, and just saying, I'm nothing. It's about really coming to grips with who you are, which is, once again, reality. Right? And it is humility that connects most of us. There's a small percentage that deal with, they're below that mark and they need to be lifted up a little bit. But the general passion of mankind is pride. And that we need humility to connect us with reality. The more that we do that, the more that we stop smacking ourselves on the back of our heads, we come to realize something that isn't always pleasant. And I said it earlier, that we need each other. That God has designed mankind for us to save each other in a way. Just like those jagged rocks that I talked about earlier. That we are helping each other on this path through salvation. And that if you run off by yourself like the hermit, because everybody else here is awful or insensitive or a hypocrite, your prayers will be like those sparks. And you'll look back over here and there will be a beam of light. And they're sinning just as much as you are. But the difference is, there's an awareness that we need community. One of the expressions of evangelism that I like to use is to love your neighbor as yourself. If you want to go to heaven, and you don't want your neighbor to go to heaven, it starts to get interesting. What I asked myself a few days ago with a particular person, I realized I needed a reality check. That someone had entered into my life that I wasn't sure I wanted to see in heaven. I didn't feel like they deserved it. And I realized I was not acting the way I should in terms of love thy neighbor. I was not ready to evangelize them. I needed to be evangelized in that moment. We need to receive it as much as we give it. And that if you have people in your life that you can't 100% say you want to see in heaven, you know what you need to work on. It's not about excusing what they've done. It's not about becoming their best friends. It's about that eternal idea of seeing them in heaven. So, what I do full-time for the Antiochian Archdiocese, I run the Becoming Truly Human Outreach Ministry. And one of the things that I love about that, I'm not really plugging it right now, but I guess that would be a good time to plug it. But one of my favorite, what I fell in love with really was this desire to create an opportunity for people to deepen their community in ways that we don't expect. It creates an environment for people to open up and admit about who they are, that they're not sharing. I guarantee you in my church and in your church, there are people struggling with things right now. They're not telling people. And they need community. They need you to love them as you love yourselves so that they can share this burden and so that you can share in their suffering. And so I wonder, for you guys, I don't have the answer. You have to answer it. Are you creating a place where people can share their suffering? Because suffering and doubt is not necessarily a bad thing, like I said, that America thinks about it. Suffering shapes us into a better version of who we are. And for many of us, without suffering, we would never make it to heaven. That we would just end up being lazy lumps on couches watching Netflix, which is very alluring in the short run. But long term, you know that you start to waste away, right? And so what I would ask your community is have a real focus on those people in your lives that might have some stuff going on inside and they don't have anybody to share it with. They don't have anybody to talk to because they're worried that they will either not be taken seriously or they're worried that you will judge them and tell them how they're wrong. But as I look through my life and all of the doubts I've dealt with, at every moment of doubt, without that doubt, I don't know if I would have broken through to a deeper level of faith. But it was that doubt that showed me what I needed to work on inside of myself. And when I did, it was amazing what was on the other side of that doubt and how I could become closer to God when I broke through it. But I didn't ever break through that doubt by myself. It always involved other people in my life. And if you think through your doubt, I guarantee you, most of the time, if not all the time, and you may not realize it, people were involved in you pushing through your doubt. That it's very, very difficult to do that on your own, and it's very unlikely. There's a missionary I've been studying for a while because I think he demonstrates what we're trying to do in America. I want America to know that the Christianity I'm offering is different than anything else they've ever seen. I want them to know that. They're only going to know that if I'm credible. They're only going to know that if I'm authentic and if I'm sincere. And there was someone who did that. And that was St. Patrick of Ireland. He did 5 things. And for many Americans, this would look out of order for our typical Christians today. And yet he was very much doing it exactly the way God wanted him to do it, and I think the way God wants us to bring Christianity to America. The first thing he did is he spent time getting to know the people around him, and ministering to them in whatever way they needed. Just what did they need? They needed to be ministered to. That was the first thing he did. As he would meet these people and minister to them, he would gather a list of names. He would pray for them by name, and he would pray for discernment from God on what God wanted St. Patrick to do with these people. He would say to God, how do you want me to help this person? And I will do it. The next thing he would do is focus on self-transformation. He did not see himself as better than them. Even though he was trying to minister to them, he always knew that he needed to improve, that he needed to grow, that it wasn't a static thing, like he had arrived and they had not. So he focused on improving himself, and he was open with how he did that. And if we're open about how we're moving from a lesser version to a better version, you can't do that without humility. Because it takes the humility to admit there was a lesser version. That I'm always moving towards a better version. And I'm doing it every day. That hopefully tomorrow, I'm closer to God than I am today. And today is my lesser version. Hopefully. But he was honest about his self-transformation. And he was honest with others on if they wanted to self-transform as well. The fourth thing he did, and I often forget this one, so I have to keep it written down. I have the others memorized, but he practiced patience. And I don't know why I always forget that one. I'm sure it has nothing to do with me struggling with patience. But he would practice patience and patience and patience. Because he knew that time forms us with these previous practices into a better version of ourselves. Into the version that we're hoping to come to on Judgment Day when we will see who we really are. And after patience, what would naturally happen after he'd done all those other things, some people would want to become a Christian. But he didn't put that at the top of the list. If they wanted to become a Christian, they were welcomed into the church. But he didn't stop doing the first 4 things in Ireland. And that is how you acquire the Holy Spirit. That is how St. Patrick had thousands around him saved. Because he ministered to them, he prayed for them by name, he prayed to know how to minister to them from God. He focused on self-transformation. He was not more prideful for them. He was patient, and he was welcoming of anyone who wanted to participate. And thousands around him were saved. We've been convinced that if we talk about God and Jesus in public, that it's bad. Basically, there's a comedian that I kind of follow. He's considered a clean comedian, Jim Gaffigan. And he doesn't go into it the way I'm going to go into it, but basically that's kind of where I got this realization that you can pretty much say anything you want in a room, and there's only one name that causes awkwardness. You can talk about Buddha. You can talk about yoga, the Dalai Lama. You can talk about Muhammad. You can talk about Joseph Smith of the Mormons. You can talk about Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. You can talk about Hitler. You can talk about Osama bin Laden. You can keep going. Talk about whatever names you want to mention. But there's only one name that consistently gives people pause. And that is when they hear the name Jesus. It is the one name that still rattles America, even though they don't want to admit it. There's something about the name itself that resonates in the core of each one of us, whether we're in the middle of rejecting him or accepting him. So that just hearing the name will cause an internal resonance, and the person will either like it or dislike it. But no other name has that effect on people. If you want to test it at your next cocktail party or your next gathering, just start talking about Jesus. You'll see what I'm talking about, and you probably know. You can talk about anybody else. It's amazing how they claim that this man can't be that important, and yet how he affects every person that hears his name. So, my question for you is, are we doing what we should when we share his name? Because I've heard people share his name in a really yucky way who are Christians. I've heard people share his name in a very yucky way who aren't Christians, when they blaspheme it. So there's a lot of yuckiness around his name, but they can't remove that stigma. And so what I would frame is, we need to talk about Jesus a bit more in America. He's not enough of a topic because people shy away from it. But I think there's a way we can do this that will make people interested. Because once again, I told you, I want America to know, I want to share with you a Christianity you haven't seen before. I want to share with you a Jesus you haven't seen before. There was a TV show years ago that, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something like, you think you know, but you have no idea. Right? Once again, reality. People think they know who Jesus is in America. They think they know what Christianity is. And we need to be honest that they've seen a lot of bad examples. And if we can't be honest about that, then we're not going to have any success in being credible, and being authentic, and being honest. So if we begin there, that yes, there are some people doing it the way I don't agree with. And even myself, I'm not perfect. But I promise you, I'm trying to show you something you haven't seen. I'm trying to show you something that you haven't experienced. But you know what? There's a good chance, because we're all human, that you have had encounters with God, but maybe you didn't know it. I had I had a conversation with a lady not too long ago on a plane. And I love talking to people on planes now. I used to hate it. But I know that no matter what, if it goes awful, we're done in like an hour or two. So it's okay. So I just test a lot of things on airplanes, just to see how it's going to go. So it was on an airplane the first time. I was next to this lady, and we were on a long flight. It was going to be a red eye. And she was trying to get her daughter situated, and I was trying to help because I could tell she was stressed. And so once she got her daughter situated and everything was fixed, she's like, "So what do you do for a living? Like, what are you doing?" I don't know how she just got interested in what I do. And I said, "Well, I try to help Christians learn how to be nice to non-Christians. And I had never said that before. She's like, wow. She's like, you probably have your hands full. And I said, yeah, business is booming. But, it's funny. And she was like, yeah, I'm not really religious at all. And she had grown up a Christian. But, just my little remark, half serious, but kind of serious, she knew exactly what I was talking about the state of Christianity in America and what people think it is. And so that now becomes my standard line, and actually, I think breaks down the walls. Because as soon as they know I'm a Christian and I'm doing Christian work, it's like I'm the Christian and they're doing this to me. Like, stay away. But when I add a little humility right up front and say, yeah, we've messed up a lot, and I'm hoping we can do something about that, they open up so amazingly. And we had such an amazing flight together, talking things through. I'll never see her again. I didn't ask her for a number. That would have been weird. But we had a really good talk. And what I wanted my friend earlier to know, Michelle, when she was kind of indifferent, she said, I don't have time for evangelism. I'm busy. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I was like, that was evangelism. That conversation. Just talking with her, telling her why I'm in love with God, why I'm in love with the church, why I'm in love with the sacraments. If you want to get people really confused and interested, fall in love with confession and tell them why. I had a conversation recently with someone about confession, and she was like, she just admitted that scared her to death. And when I started to tell her how I feel heading into confession, and what happens there, and then after, she was very curious. She wanted to know more. Because when I go to confession, and if I actually go, and sometimes I hold back, and I know when I've held back, and then I'm like, I got to go back and do it again. It's a do-over. Because I didn't go all in. But if I go all in the way I'm supposed to, and I know that you know this, you feel the shackles come off. You feel a connection with reality. Right? And so when I share that with someone who has no idea what confession is, other than it feels like I have to, go talk to a man behind a curtain, I say, no, that's not what it is at all. And I tell them, it's such an amazing evangelistic opportunity. But what I'm not doing is sharing doctrine. I love doctrine. I do. I love the doctrine of our church. But the doctrine is supposed to inform our daily lives. The doctrine informs how I do confession. Right? And then I can take that experience of God, and in confession you are experiencing God, and share that with others. And I don't tell them when I confess. That's not what I'm not saying you should go do that. I'm just telling that there's a transformation that happens. And I said, you know what it's like to carry a secret and how it burdens. We all know what that feels like. And when you get to just hand that over and not carry that secret anymore, because you truly are sorry, that's the key. When we go to confession, we've already repented. We're now giving it to God. Some of us go because we need help giving it to God, and that's good too. But in general, the church understood confession is, you made a mistake, you know you're sorry, you repented, now you go confess your sins. And this is something that we have to offer to America, and they don't know the value of it. It may not seem like this is part of evangelism, but I'll tell you why it is. America pays attention to people in white coats. Our doctors, our psychiatrists, our therapists. And if you're depressed or you're struggling, what a therapist will tell you to do these days, and I've heard this, and I'm not saying every therapist, but I've heard this. And the way they want you to take care of yourself is very different than what the church tells you to do. And we have a really good track record of healing people with confession. they don't really have a good track record of, you're depressed, go treat yourself to a 1-week vacation at Sandals. And it didn't work. They have a really good track record of going through therapy after therapy after therapy. And I love therapy, but I love a Christ-centered therapy. I like to take the orthodox theology and put counseling skills on top of it. That's pastoral counseling. But when you take just the therapeutic skills and you leave out the spiritual essence of who we are, you're not healing. We have to address this aspect of us. And there are more people than we realize who are open to the idea that there is a spirit world, that there are angels and demons. More people believe in angels and demons than God. That's a recent statistic that'll confuse you. I learned that one recently. There are so many ways that we can talk to people. That's what I'm trying to say. Open up the conversations, find out where they are, and engage with what you have in common. And if they've struggled in the area of angels and demons, we have a lot to say about angels and demons. We have a lot of experience with angels and demons. Hopefully you have experience with your angel. And you can talk about, yes, I believe that there's an angel that watches over me. There's people that will accept that. And that's all they can accept right now. But that's a starting place for evangelism. It begins to move beyond the fear and the indifference and the ignorance when you're focusing on something you have in common. That's why we avoid evangelism, is because we feel like we're so different. We're Orthodox, they're not. We're Christians, they're not. Even if it's a Protestant, you might go, oh, I think they're crazy, and I'm not crazy. Doesn't mean you're not crazy just because you're Orthodox. You can still be crazy. We accept all crazies. So what I'm saying is when you start to break down those walls and realize you have things in common with these people, and if you could talk about those things and find where they are, and it's not always that easy. People don't always want to give that up. But if you can find it through genuine questions that show that you're interested in them as a person, not interrogating them, not interviewing them, you just want to get to know people. I have this weird thing that's happened since I got into evangelism. And it sounds kind of shallow. But it's actually not. America's obsessed with the way we look. Right? Our physical appearance. And I believe God loves beauty. When I started in evangelism, I thought I saw people for who they were. I thought I did. But if that's the case, how come people are getting more beautiful to me the deeper I get into evangelism? I meet more and more beautiful people physically than I did before. When I see you, I see a beauty I wouldn't have seen 3 years ago. Physically. Because you were made in the physical image of God. And it may seem shallow, but I started to realize how God looks at us, the beauty he sees, and just who we are right now. And he wouldn't have made us this way if he didn't think it was beautiful. And so, like I said, we have things in common with people. There's nothing wrong with beauty. It's a distortion of beauty that we don't want to get into with America. We want them to know that you can distort good things. You can distort sexuality. Sexuality is a beautiful thing. You can distort it. Right? Food is a beautiful thing. You can distort it. Our bodies are beautiful things, but you can distort it. And you'd be surprised how many people, somewhere along those lines, you'll find something in common. It's the basis for a real relationship. It's the basis for you learning from this person. One of the best examples I've ever seen of someone who loved their neighbor was an atheist. Hands down, atheist. He was the best neighbor on the block. He wasn't just like a good neighbor. I mean, like, State Farm should go and interview him. okay, and be like, this is our next guy. This is our guy. I was out of town a little long once, and he cut my grass. He always made sure everybody's trash cans were taken care of. He would check on your family if you were out of town. And he was an atheist. I learned a lot from him. I learned how much of he was doing a better job at loving his neighbor than I was. A few years later, I moved in next to someone after that who I really didn't like. And once I started to realize, I avoid her, I do everything I can to stay away from her, but I'm going to stand up and talk about evangelism and loving your neighbor. And I don't like the one next door. I started working on her. You know what happened? I started to like her. She started to become beautiful. I started to learn things from her. Because I removed my pride. I removed the idea that I was better than her. And I started to connect with reality. So we're kind of coming to the end of my session. And I will finish with this. America's kind of hot about religion and politics right now. And you might feel like those are the two hardest things to talk about. And in a way, they probably are. But in a way, they might be two of the most crucial things that you as Orthodox Christians could start to have really valuable conversations with people. And I'll tell you what I've been doing. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm just going to tell you what I've been doing. The first thing I've been doing with religion is just talking about ideas. What do people think about the idea of this? The idea of that? What do you think about the idea of, and we talked about this a little bit, about how do you create free will and no evil? Just that idea, right? What about the idea of is the earth here by accident or not? There's not a lot of people who really believe it's here by accident. It's very rare. The existence of matter itself, is it an accident? And there's very few people who believe that it is. If they do believe it's a pure accident, then what guides them? How do they know what's right from wrong? Find out that from them. This is kind of how I talk about religion these days. And you find out some very interesting things. Obviously, politics was difficult to talk about last year, no matter what side you were on. Families were separated. Churches were separated. Orthodox churches were divided down the center on the political process of America last year. And not my own wisdom, given to me someone else, they said focus on the ideas and move away from the people. Because the people, and just be honest about that. Say, I really don't want to talk about any politicians. Can we just talk about this idea? And then talk about the idea. If you want to talk about the oil pipeline up in North Dakota, talk about the oil pipeline. Just don't talk about any politicians involved. And when you start to get around the ideas, what you see it happen is they calm down a little bit, and you start to have a really good conversation. My sister-in-law and I have very different ideas on politics. But we've been talking about ideas over the past year. I've been doing this with her, and I told her, I said, I just want to talk about ideas. Can we do that? And we've had some great talks, and we disagreed. And we talked about politics. How many people can say that? I'll tell you what's wrong is we should all be able to say that. That we are forgetting how to agree to disagree. We don't know how to have that conversation. And so what will make it a little easier on you, I think, because it's making it easier on me, is to focus on these ideas. I'll tell you one of the obstacles for a lot of people of coming into the Orthodox faith, if you want to know. This is something that you should think about. How does the Orthodox Church view everyone that's not in the Orthodox Church? That's not visibly present. How do we feel about Protestants? How do we feel about Catholics? How do we feel about Buddhists? How do we feel about atheists? How do we feel about agnostics? What does the church say about them? right now, and this has been for a number of years, a number of people who do the work of evangelism full-time in the Orthodox Church are repeatedly saying this is the number one stumbling block for people coming into the Orthodox Church. It surprised me. I don't know if it surprises you, but it surprised me that that's the stumbling block. But it's not surprising when you realize what they're asking. What they're asking is, how judgmental are you? How prideful are you? How arrogant are you? Because all the other groups I've dealt with who say the same thing about being the true faith, they were really arrogant and judgmental and prideful. So are you just like them? Yes. I say some of us are, but we're not supposed to be. So that's what we need to be prepared. If you want to be prepared to talk about some things with people who are not in the Orthodox faith, even people who are in the Orthodox faith and they're struggling because they think the Orthodox Church hates their gay friend. Because we think we're better than them. That's what the person thinks in the pews. And we have to help them see we love them. That I do things that disagree with the Orthodox Church. And the Orthodox Church still loves me. My people still love me. That's not what this is about. And so those are not really easy conversations. But if you'll start talking with those you trust, talking with Father, just kind of exploring this. You might call it practice, but it's really not. Really spend some time exploring, what am I going to do when someone finds out I go to St. George and they go, oh, you don't let gay people get married. Why do you hate gay people? What are you going to say? You have an amazing opportunity here of evangelism. You could say, absolutely don't let them. You kind of blew it if you say that. I'm not saying I was introduced in my freshman year by my freshman English teacher in college. He was amazing. And he really wanted us to see the difference between honesty and brutal honesty. And he wasn't a Christian. Once again, the things we learn from people who are not Orthodox Christians. And he gave us examples in his own life of when he had been brutally honest and when he had been honest. And I realized how often I clung to my brutal honesty. And I used it as a weapon against people. I'm like, I'm telling the truth. Stab, stab. Right? But there's an honest way to do it that doesn't stab them. And so if someone asks me about the Orthodox Church and gay marriage, I tell them it's really hard to have that conversation until you and I talk about the purpose of marriage. And that changes everything. And it puts the conversation where it needs to be. I'm not deflecting. I'm talking about really the problem. I'm not suggesting to you to divert and shift and gather time to come up with your secret answer. I'm saying we need to talk, we need to meet them where they are. And that's actually the problem. The problem is not that we disagree on gay marriage. The problem is we disagree on what marriage is. That we're using the same word to describe two different things. We're using the same word to describe two different purposes. And so I just say, we're not on the same page there. And when I had a 10-minute conversation with a woman about this, it was great. Because she agreed we had two different ideas. We weren't talking about the same thing. So we need to spend time preparing ourselves for these topics. If we are Orthodox Christians, we must be prepared to defend the joy that is inside us. But God's defense is love. That's how he wins someone over. And you can defend them with a stab of brutal honesty, or you can defend the joy inside of you with some love. And try to be a conduit. But it takes work. You have to think about these things. So to debrief on this, you can talk about religion in America. You can talk about politics. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be indifferent, because it should be in your natural conversations. But it's going to take a little bit of self-transformation. It's going to take some ministry to people, sharing in their suffering. It's going to take some prayer for people by name. It's going to take some patience. And in the end, those who want to become Orthodox will. But it doesn't stop you from doing the first four, just like St. Patrick did. All right? Do we have any questions? Because I'm done for now. Any questions? It's okay if you don't. Okay.
Thank you.
It was really good, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my part, I could probably do in about 10 minutes or so.
Oh, that's quick?
Yeah.
What do you need 10 minutes?
No, I mean, I can.
Do you want to give